So joining me today is Professor Anu Nagarajan at the University of Michigan Law School of Business. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
You're welcome.
So,
Nice seeing you again, Vishnu.
Yes, great seeing you. So would you like to give a short introduction about like what you do and in your profession?
Okay. I am Anu Nagarajan and I teach strategy at the Law School of Business. I'm a very proud graduate of the PhD program through Rackham and Ross in strategy. And so I'm truly maize and blue, dyed and true.
Great way to put it. Where I'd like to start is, kind of talking about this ongoing supply chain crisis that has been all over the news for the past year. And I'm curious to know, like, how much of it do you think was kind of an organizational time bomb, an accident kind of waiting to happen, in that we had so much over-reliances on processes like just-in-time manufacturing and so much of our manufacturing being offshore?
Yeah, so there's an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah, we can always say in hindsight that it was a time bomb waiting to happen. But if you look at industrial progress, it has always worked towards efficiency, right? And so as communications and logistics and computing power increased, you found that people were able to make more efficient choices. The real prices of goods fell over time because of the fact that we were able to source from every part of the world, right? So we all enjoyed those benefits because of the fact that our supply chains were so super efficient. We could basically transport things, and manufacture very efficiently, just in time, from all across the world, right? So as we think about it in that context, the fact that things happen, we do have some buffers for those, but we are a global, business environment. And so when there are disruptions, it's going to affect us. The only alternative is to say, hey, you know what, there are going to be, if there are going to be global business disruptions, then we are going to be very national, but there could be national disruptions as well, like, wildfires or earthquakes or, things like that. So disruptions are inevitable. And the key question is, how do we deal with them? I don't know if, you can stop progress because we're afraid of what's going to happen.
Definitely. And, hindsight is always 2020 in these kinds of issues. And it's like important to not just like let that cloud our entire judgment on like the system that's been in place for so long. But with that being said, like, do you think that this kind of disequilibrium that we've been encountering in supply and demand is kind of here to stay? Because we see like events like manufacturing shutdowns in China because of like pandemic resurgences, obviously the turmoil in Ukraine, these kinds of events like continue to like cause that disequilibrium in supply and demand. And it seems like these events can happen at any given time. Who's to say like they can't? So do you feel like these can continue to threaten our supply chain in the future?
Yeah, I think the pendulum had swung so far to globalization and basically sourcing from the cheapest source and efficiency, that I think now, because of all these disruptions, we see some of the challenges of that super efficiency, right? So we are moving back towards and I hear a lot about nationalization, trying to bringing back to within the US borders, more manufacturing coming back to the US, right? And that does mean that customers will have to end up paying more, because after all, we're not going to be able to pay the same kind of wages. And one of the things that, we see, even if you think about programming, a lot of it was outsourced, and that has no supply chain implications. But what's happening is everyone is sourcing from elsewhere, and therefore prices are going up elsewhere, right? So, overall, the equilibrium is there, whether it's due to disruption or because of competitive pressures. And, ultimately, the tendency is for us to kind of look at what is the impact for the customer. What is the customer willing to pay for, right? And then think about, how do we best manage it to meet that? I think supernormal profits are possible only in certain circumstances, like currently oil prices being high, but otherwise it's going to be the margins may decrease because customers' willingness to pay may not be as high as the rate at which wages are going up.
Definitely. And I think the customer willingness to pay is really important to focus on, because like looking at like gas prices specifically, like even before like the Ukraine conflict started, they were trending higher since like post-COVID lockdowns. The CPI for gas and obviously for like rent, like you were talking about, like wages, were at like historic highs. And I think that kind of speaks to like the fact that demand is kind of has been trying to catch up ever since COVID kind of started, the COVID recovery period started.
Yeah, there is a nice example, right, in real time where demand dropped dramatically, right? And you saw there was a phase where people, did not even have, there was no space to store oil. So, people were actually getting paid to store oil. So it reached that critical phase where COVID basically shut everything down, right? And now, we basically feel suddenly a sense of freedom. So we want to do everything, have every experience, and as much as possible, enjoy interaction with people, which means that, that the wonderful thing is that this is such an interesting experience as far as organizations are concerned. Because on one hand, you have, basically people wanting to live their life to the fullest. That's the customer, right? On the other hand, this has an implication for organizations and their employees, right? You find the phenomenon of the great resignation. Why? Because people have learned that they can make do with less, that they need people, they need those experiences. So the rat race has become a little bit slower. They don't want to get on that eternal wheel of, working. And then you also have this thing of basically wanting to have the flexibility to work from home. And that has an implication for productivity, as research has shown. So overall, I think people have started thinking more about their personal life and personal goals rather than the pursuit of money. So that does mean a lot for how you run a business, right?
Mhm.
So inflation is hitting, but are people willing to work more to compensate for that? Where is it going to hit the bottom line? Who's going to succumb first? Are the businesses going to keep raising prices because their wages are going to have to go up? Or is it, the customers are not going to be willing to pay more and therefore they cut back? This is an interesting time to live in.
For sure. It's always like it's like a game of chicken, like who's going to who's going to
Right.
who's going to take the first action, and the other side is always waiting.
Right.
With like the implication of these gas prices, I'm curious to like know, do you think this is going to be like the ultimate like impetus for like customers like shifting towards electric vehicles? Because it feels like for a while we've kind of been waiting for that massive large scale transformation towards like more electric vehicles hitting the road. And cost has always been a huge barrier for that, but now seeing that gas prices present almost like kind of their own price challenges, do you feel like this is the time? But because at the same time, auto production is also kind of stagnating. This is not really a great time to buy cars because of chip shortages, inventories are low. So just curious to hear your thoughts on like that whole dichotomy.
Right. So it's a very interesting thing. There is a situation that happened in the 70s. So I don't know if you've seen any of the old Westerns, old movies, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, where all the cars were like boats, these big cars with fins and everything else. They were gas guzzlers, right? And when Honda and Toyota first came, first, the quality wasn't great. And second, they were tiny cars. And the American population just didn't like it. Then they used to these big cars with plenty of space. But we had the oil crisis in 73, where, because of uh, oil embargo with Iran,
Right.
we basically could not, the prices of oil, gasoline just went sky high. And then people started to think about fuel economy and smaller cars. So it's almost, a similar situation now, that oil prices are going up, gas prices are going up. So we already have small cars, we have very fuel efficient cars with gasoline. So the question is, can we do without gasoline? Can we move completely to the electric vehicle? Now, the same people for whom it matters a lot, that is, the increasing price of gas, are the people who are not going to be able to afford electric vehicles. Think about the average price of an electric vehicle versus the price of, uh, uh, internal combustion engine car, right?
Mhm.
It's, it's at least a time and a half.
Yeah.
So can most people afford it? So until the prices actually come down to a more affordable range, and like you said, the production increases because you need economies of scale to bring the costs down.
Yeah.
This is going to be more of one of the big challenges that you talked about, demand and supply. The supply is very limited. Demand can only go up if prices come down. So, it's a tough situation. It's very, very hard to actually think about how it's going to get resolved. But I can see why change is likely to happen. But the semiconductor shortage is, not going to get resolved very fast.
Mhm.
The war in Ukraine has created shortages in terms of some critical, inputs for the batteries. So all these are going to accumulate in terms of shortage of cars in general, leave alone whether it's going to be an ICE car or an electric car, right?
Yeah, for sure. And kind of like taking that into account, like, and stepping back and like looking at a larger picture, how do you see like businesses kind of shifting their strategy in the future to accommodate all of these risk factors that we talked about?
Well, it's not easy being a CEO today, right? Because you're getting it. It's like the perfect storm. We had COVID, we had that pandemic, which basically shut down the entire world. It's something that I don't think any recent generation and recent memory has experienced something similar. And think about it this way: we've become a much more global, population than the last time the world experienced a pandemic. So, it truly was a global pandemic because of the fact that everybody is traveling all over the world, right? And then, goods and services come from everywhere. So with, all the things going on, it's very hard for a CEO kind of to buffer. The predictability factor has come down by quite a bit, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what is likely to happen. But you can't just stand still. If you're running a business, people depend on you, and your shareholders depend on you, your employees depend on you, your customers depend on you. You cannot say, oh, you know what, I'm uncertain about my decisions. You have to make decisions with the most information that you have, right? Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And uncertainty is always going to be an issue. And it's about how like the best businesses and the best managers are the ones who can like evolve to those different situations.
No wonder Warren Buffett just bought an insurance company, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But this has been great, Professor. Really appreciate the time that you took today to give a really detailed and insightful perspective on these issues.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me.